Proverbs 16:12 says, "A worthless person, a wicked man, goes about with crooked speech, winks with his eyes, signals with his feet, points with his finger, with perverted heart devises evil, continually sowing discord. Therefore calamity will come upon him suddenly. In a moment he will be broken beyond healing." It took an honorable electorate to keep a dishonorable woman from breaking through the glass ceiling in her selfish ambition to become the first woman president. It took an honorable and duly elected president, falsely accused of racism and misogyny by the dishonorable woman, to be the one to nominate Gina Haspel, a true leader and honorable patriot, to be head of the CIA. As the dishonorable woman gets her reward for her dirty deeds, watch now and see how the honorable woman handles herself under congressional scrutiny as she breaks through the glass ceiling with a much purer motive than to be selfishly ambitious to do so.
They gather and exploit data at an unrivaled scale. They're building the most capable and well-funded military in the world, second to ours. And so my question, first and foremost, is the agency, as it stands today, equipped and structured to meet this multifaceted challenge?
Senator, thank you for that question. One of the first things Mike Pompeo and I looked at when I returned to the agency from overseas in early 2017 is how we're doing on the hard targets. That's what you're talking about: China, Iran, Russia, North Korea. Of course, our investment in counterterrorism has to be very significant. We have to be vigilant, and we can't take our eyes off that ball. But there are more strategic threats, and you talked about one of them, China. China's rise as a global power. CIA has a very important role in monitoring China's rise as a global power. China's efforts to diminish U.S. influence, not only in the Pacific, but all around the world. China's unfair trade practices, and China's overt and illicit efforts to steal U.S. technology and know-how and intellectual property. We, with the support of this committee, are raising our investment on each of these hard targets. We have incredible expertise on China at the agency. It is a very strong team. I'm very proud of our analysts. It is a subject that a week doesn't go by that either the president asks for an expert briefing or Secretary Mattis asks for someone to come over and brief him on China issues. We have a good program, but your more general point is that we have to do more, and we have to invest more on each of these hard targets.
Well, I recently introduced legislation with Senator Cotton that would block the U.S. government from buying or leasing telecommunication equipment from Huawei or ZTE Corporation beyond government purchase. I would ask you, just as with the citizens that are watching, if you were just an everyday American or even someone involved in any sort of sensitive work, would you purchase a Huawei phone or connect your phone or computer to a Huawei or ZTE network?
Well, Senator, as I mentioned, I don't even have a social media account, but I wouldn't use Huawei products.
And
Senator's time's expired.
thank you.
Senator Wyden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Haspel, thank you very much for your courtesy in meeting with me yesterday. However, I regret to have to say there is no greater indictment of this nomination process than the fact that you are deciding what the country gets to know about you and what it doesn't. And so far, the American people have only been given information that is designed to help you get confirmed. Everything else has been classified. So I've got some questions. I think they're fairly short, and some I hope we can do yes or no. Now, you publicly released the Morell report, which some have cited as reflecting favorably about your involvement in the destruction of interrogation tapes. Do you have any objection this morning to the public release of the Durham investigation, which would give the American people more information on the same topic and which does not come from the CIA?
Senator, just to be clear, the request for the declassification of the Morrell memo was in response to a member on this committee. I have not read the Durham report, and I don't know the classification, so let me take that for the record, if I may.
But do you have any objection?
Well, I haven't seen it, so I haven't read it, so I don't know.
Well, I'm going to ask you about this in the classified session, but I think in the name of fairness with respect to your role on these issues, this ought to be made public just the way the Morrell report was. Now, on Sunday, the Washington Post reported that unnamed officials were pushing back against accusations that you supported torture in one of our biggest papers in the country. Between 2005 and 2007, the program was winding down. The CIA was capturing fewer detainees and waterboarding was no longer approved. During that time, did you ever call for the program to be continued or expanded?
Senator, I think like all of us who were in the Counterterrorism Center and working at CIA in those years after 9/11, we all believed in our work. We were committed. We had been charged with making sure the country wasn't attacked again, and we had been informed that the techniques in CIA's program were legal and authorized by the highest legal authority in our country and also the president. So I believe I and my colleagues in the Counterterrorism Center were working as hard as we could with the tools that we were given to make sure that we were successful in our mission.
My time is short, and that respectfully is not responsive to the question. That was a period where the agency was capturing fewer detainees, waterboarding was no longer approved, and especially in light of that Washington Post story, I would really like to have on the record whether you ever called for the program to be continued, which it sure sounds to me like your answer suggested. You said, well, we were doing our job, it ought to be continued. That troubles me very much because you were the chief of staff to the deputy director for operations. It's a senior position. So I'm quite troubled by that response.
Senator, may I just say that I don't know which Washington Post story you're referring to, but let me say this about myself. After 9/11, I didn't look to go sit on the Swiss desk. I stepped up. I was not on the sidelines. I was on the front lines in the Cold War, and I was on the front lines in the fight against al-Qaeda. I'm very proud of the fact that we captured the perpetrator of 9/11, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. I think we did extraordinary work. To me, the tragedy is that the controversy surrounding the interrogation program, which as I've already indicated to Senator Warner, I fully understand that, but it has cast a shadow over what has been a major contribution to protecting this country.
I respect a number of those points. I just am trying to get some answers here to questions that I think are particularly relevant. According to a press story today about the destruction of the interrogation videotapes, Jose Rodriguez told you in advance that he was going to take matters into his own hands. Did that conversation happen?
Senator, no, it did not. Mr. Rodriguez indicated to me that he planned to discuss it with the then director, Goss.
Let me see if I can get one last in on it. When did you become aware that the cable authorizing the destruction of the interrogation videotapes had been sent?
Senator, as Chief of Staff, it's a desk-bound job, so I was at my desk at least 12 hours every day, and I could see my computer screen. So it was shortly after Mr. Rodriguez, who sat right across the hall from me, had released the cable.
I'm over my time. I'll ask some more about this in the classified session. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Jack Reed and I co-sponsored the McCain-Feinstein bill that banned waterboarding and other enhanced interrogation techniques because we viewed them as contrary to American values and tantamount to torture. So let me ask you a series of questions. First, were you involved in any way in the creation of the enhanced interrogation program?
Senator, I was not, and I was not read into the program until about a year into its existence.
Were you a senior manager at the CIA at the time that the program was created?
No, I had just returned from an overseas posting. I was a GS-15. I was not yet a member of the Senior Executive Service. I was assigned as a deputy group chief. That's pretty far down the totem pole in a program that had nothing to do with the detention and interrogation program.
You said that the program had already been in effect for some time before you were read into it. What was your reaction when you learned of the program?
Senator, it was a new subject for me. As I said, we lacked interrogation expertise at the agency. We didn't have interrogators. I was told that interrogation experts had designed the program, that the highest legal authority in the United States had approved it, and that the President of the United States had approved it, as well as a trusted leadership at the Central Intelligence Agency.
Have your views of the program evolved in the years following the attacks on our country on 9/11?
Senator, they have. I think it's very important. I think for any leader, as you go through a career, you have to learn the leadership lessons. I'm not going to sit here with the benefit of hindsight and judge the very good people who made hard decisions, who were running the agency in very extraordinary circumstances at the time. But as I mentioned to Senator Warner, this country has had the opportunity to reflect because we have some space. We're not fearing another attack. And we have deliberated about the standard we want to use in interrogations, and that is the Army Field Manual. The very important thing to know about CIA is we follow the law. We followed the law then, and we follow the law now. But I would never permit CIA to resume an interrogation program.
So that's a very good segue into a very important question. As a candidate, President Trump repeatedly expressed his support for waterboarding. In fact, he said we should go beyond waterboarding. So if the CIA has a high-value terrorism suspect in its custody, and the president gave you a direct order to waterboard that suspect, what would you do?
Senator, I would advise, I do not believe the president would ask me to do that, but we have today in the U.S. government other U.S. government entities that conduct interrogations. DOD uses the Army Field Manual, and they conduct battlefield interrogations, and CIA has incredible expertise it can bring to the table in support of those interrogations. The FBI has its authorities to conduct interrogations, and as you know, we have the High Value Interrogation Group. So, I would advise anyone who asks me about it that CIA is not the right place to conduct interrogations. We don't have interrogators, and we don't have interrogation expertise. So I believe that would be the reason I have been nominated is that people have some respect for my views on these issues. My experiences during those days after 9/11 inform my views. I'm extremely knowledgeable, and I'm also extremely knowledgeable about the price CIA working level men and women out in the trenches paid for decisions made after 9/11.
So debriefing a source is very different from interrogating a detainee. Should the CIA even be in the business of interrogating detainees?
We're not in the business of interrogating.
Because of the Hague is what you're saying.
Well, we're not in the business of interrogating detainees. As you said, there's a big difference between interrogation and simple question and answer. Having direct access to a terrorist is extremely valuable for intelligence collection, and we do that. But CIA does not today conduct interrogations. We never did historically, and we're not getting back in that business.
Thank you.
Senator's time's expired. Senator Heinrich.
Ms. Haspel, you didn't actually answer the question, what would you do if the president ordered you to get back in that business?
Senator, the president has selected me to
that's a
give him
yes or no.
advice. I would not restart under any circumstances in an interrogation program at CIA, under any circumstances.
Thank you. You have repeatedly said that at the time, the CIA's use of interrogation techniques like waterboarding were determined to be legal. Now, there was an opinion written by the Office of Legal Counsel. I don't believe those actions were ever legal. They certainly didn't meet the bar set by either the Geneva Conventions or our own Army field manual. And I'm not aware of a single court ruling that affirmed that opinion. Today, I'm not really interested in whether you believe those techniques were legal, but I am interested in the question that Senator Warner asked you. We got a very legalistic answer to that question. Let me ask you again, were these the right thing to do? Are they consistent with American values, fundamentally? What do you believe?
Senator, I believe very strongly in American values and America being an example to the rest of the world. That is why I support the fact that we have chosen to hold ourselves to a stricter moral standard.
But that's about Congress and all of us. I want to know what you think.
I think that we should hold ourselves to a stricter moral standard, and I would never allow CIA to be involved in coercive interrogations.
Where was that moral compass at the time?
Senator, that was 17 years ago, and it's, you know, CIA, like the U.S. Army and the U.S. Marine Corps, is an organization. It's a large bureaucracy, and when you're out in the trenches at far-flung outposts in the globe, and Washington says, here's what we need you to do, this is legal, the Attorney General has deemed it so, the President of the United States is counting on you to prevent another attack.
It was legal.
I'm sorry?
I know you believed it was legal. I want to see, I want to feel, I want to trust that you have the moral compass that you said you have. You're giving very legalistic answers to very fundamentally moral questions.
Senator, that we've provided the committee every evaluation since my training report when I first joined in 1985. In all of my assignments, I have conducted myself honorably and in accordance with U.S. law. My parents raised me right. I know the difference between right and wrong.
Let's move on to the videotapes. You told me earlier this week that you supported the decision of the CIA's Deputy Director of Operations to order the destruction of those videotapes depicting the use of EITs. Would you still support that order today?
Senator, I would not. I think it's, as I said, it's very important that people learn. Experience is a good teacher, and the piece that was missing from the tapes was making sure that we had all the stakeholders' concurrence. There's also another very important leadership lesson. And as director of CIA, when your officers are concerned about their physical security, you can't let it languish in your inbox
Absolutely,
for 3 years with no action.
We should support that security. Why couldn't the agency have simply digitized that video and then blacked out the faces of any agents in those videos? Why actually destroy the videotapes? Doesn't that feel like a cover-up, even if it isn't?
Senator, I don't think we were worried about official release. This was at a time when the entire program was the subject of unauthorized leaks, and someone was found guilty of those unauthorized leaks. So the concern was an irresponsible leak of our officers' faces to the world, not an official release.
No, I understand that, but if you would have blacked out the agents' faces, destroyed the videotapes, and then kept a digital record, that would have addressed those security concerns.
Senator, I'm just not a technical person, so I don't...
It's not that complicated.
Well, I don't, Senator, I don't know if that was considered or not.
Do you think that a transcript that says the detainee continued to scream or the detainee appeared to be drowning has the same gravity, the same reality as an actual video?
Senator, I never saw the videos. I do know that we keep very complete and almost verbatim records in our cable traffic. But I think that the issue was the security risk posed to our officers.
Thank you.
Gentleman's time's expired. Senator Blunt.
Thank you, Chairman. Ms. Haspel, we haven't really mentioned the broad support that you have had publicly from Democrats, Republicans, people who've run this agency in the past, people have associated with, frankly, people that this committee members on this committee have shown great respect and regard for, have shown that same respect and regard for you. I heard General Hayden, former CIA director, say the other day that he would be incredibly comfortable when the president was making decisions. He may have said, maybe even more than comfortable, he said he would feel more secure or something like that if you were the person in the room. That's really what we're talking about right now. We're not talking about what happened 17 years ago. We should be talking about what might happen 17 days or 17 weeks from now. I thought General Hayden actually captured my exact feeling on this topic. The importance of you being in the room, your mastery of the facts, your broad understanding of what has happened during your career all over the world, the cause, the result, the relationships, all of those things. This is a term I think is often overused, and I try not to use it very often, but it is the truth to power. You're in the room, you understand the facts. Talk about your sense of obligation to present those facts and to speak truth to power at a moment when it matters.
Senator, thank you. Truth to power is one of CIA's most important missions. Like with any new administration, CIA has to demonstrate to the new team what we can bring to the table. I'm incredibly proud, even though I come from the operational side, I'm incredibly proud of the analyst at CIA. That's really our face with policymakers, including the Congress. They do an incredible job on the President's daily brief each day. They do an incredible job on the expert briefings they provide to inform the important decisions our policymakers must consider. As I mentioned, there isn't a week that doesn't go by that I am not the subject of a request to have an analyst by name come over and talk about some of the big issues. Our North Korea team has a superb reputation. Our China team is running all over this town. They're so busy providing briefings. We are all about bringing the most sophisticated, objective, all-source analysis we can to make sure that the President and his team have the best intelligence that we can deliver. It is hugely important.
Capitol Police, please remove her.
The question is, what do you do to human beings in U.S. custody? Bloody Gina! Bloody Gina! Bloody Gina! Bloody Gina! You are a torturer! Bloody Gina!
So let's go back. You, as a leader of the team, I appreciate that. I appreciate your respect for the team. Let's be sure we've talked specifically about you. You're in the room. There is a fact that either hasn't appropriately been looked at or considered or appreciated in your view. What do you do at that moment?
Senator, thank you. I've already worked with this president and his team for 15 months. I think I have a great reputation with them. I'm at the table with Secretary Mattis and General Dunford and Secretary Mnuchin. I'm at many of the principals' meetings. I back up the former director in the Oval Office. I'm part of Director Coates' team. Sometimes Sue Gordon is with me. I think we're bringing a very high-quality product. As a senior intelligence officer, someone who spent a lot of time overseas in some of these places, the president does turn to me for my view on certain countries and certain experiences. I give him my best advice, but I always separate my view as someone who's been out in the field from the view of our analysts, because we're really there to deliver the objective all-source analysis that they write to support the president.
So you would see yourself as the master of the facts to be sure the president knows all the facts the president needs to know.
I think that's incredibly important, Senator.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks, Senator. Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I've been to some of those garden spots with the committee, and I have the greatest admiration and respect for what you and your colleagues have done over the years and do now. That's one of the great responses I have when I come back from one of those trips, and the stations are, the people in those places are brave and loyal and patriotic Americans. A quick yes or no question, not having to do with what we've been talking about. In January of 2017, the IC issued a joint report on the Russia involvement in the 2016 elections. Do you agree with the findings of that report?
Senator, I do.
Thank you. We've talked a bit about the statement in Mr. Rizzo's book that you had previously run the interrogation program. I understand he has changed his view on that. Your career timeline, 2001-03, Deputy Group Chief, Counterterrorism Center, 03 to 04, Senior Level Supervisor, Counterterrorism Center, 04 to 05, Deputy Chief, National Resources Division. In any of those jobs, were you in a supervisory or management capacity in connection with the rendition and interrogation program?
Senator, we'll be able to go over, and I know you have some of this information, but we'll be able to go over any of my classified assignments in this afternoon session, and I can talk about that. Just to be clear, Mr. Rizzo didn't change his view. He was wrong, and he issued a correction.
Who's deciding what's classified and what isn't in terms of what's released to this committee?
Senator, we are following the existing guidelines. There are very...
Who's deciding?
We are following the existing
Who is
guidelines.
we?
Well, I have chosen to follow the guidelines that exist
So
for the
you are
RDI information.
you are making the classification decisions about what material should be released to this committee?
I am electing not to make an exception for myself, but I am adhering to existing RDI guidelines. If I may just...
That's fine, but I just wanted to understand that. With regard to the cable, Mr. Rodriguez said that he asked you to ask two questions of the lawyers the day before the drafting of the cable. One was, was it legal to destroy the tape? Second, did he have the authority? Did you mention to those lawyers the intention to issue a cable that would destroy the tapes when you asked those two questions, or were those the only questions you asked?
No, Senator, I explained that Mr. Rodriguez wanted to get resolution on this issue and that he was planning to have a conversation with the director about it, and he needed to have revalidation of those 2 points.
And when you drafted the cable, is that correct?
Yes, at his request.
Isn't it common practice in the CIA when a cable, particularly of this importance, is drafted, that it be copied to various parts of the legal establishment within the CIA? And was that done in this case? Was that cable copied to Mr. Rizzo or other lawyers within the agency?
Senator, there was robust coordination with the lawyers at CIA
Were they
on
copied
this
on
issue.
the cable?
Mr. Rodriguez chose not to copy the lawyers on the cable because he took the decision on his own authority and he wanted to take responsibility for it. He has been very clear and upfront about that.
And you were aware, because you drafted the cable, that the lawyers weren't copied on the cable?
But I knew that the lawyers had been consulted in a meeting and consulted over many times over 3 years.
In May of 2005, Mr. Rizzo reports, I told Jose and his chief of staff, that was you, is that correct? I can't recall if I talked to them separately or together. They were crestfallen because they were now on notice that the DNI, two successive White House counsels, and the vice president's top lawyer had weighed in strongly against destroying the tapes. Do you recall that conversation?
Senator, I don't recall that specific conversation. However, I was aware that there were some objections, and that is why Jose was going to go back to the director.
Those aren't some objections. Those are very straightforward prohibitions by your superiors to not destroy the tapes, were they not?
Senator, I don't recall that specific conversation.
But you do know, and Mr. Morrell in the report which has been released says something similar. He said, the record is clear that Mr. Rodriguez, and I presume you, was aware that 2 White House counsels, the Counsel of the Vice President, the DNI, the DCIA, and the HIPSI ranking member had either expressed opposition or reservation about the destruction of tapes. Did you know that at the time you drafted that cable?
Senator, I don't believe I knew that entire list, but I knew there were some objections, and that is why we were going back to the director of the Central Intelligence Agency.
Final question, was it a matter of coincidence that this decision was made to destroy the tapes in the same week that 2 major stories appeared in American newspapers? The 11th Amendment was being considered and the McCain Amendment was on the floor of the U.S. Senate. Was it a mere coincidence that that was after 3 years of delay, the decision was taken to destroy the tapes?
Senator, I don't believe in the Directorate of Operations front office we were aware of legislation. The lawyers may have been aware. I do not believe we were aware.
There's a broader question, not legislation. I'm talking about stories in the newspapers. There's a great deal of public interest just that week in the whole interrogation question. Were you aware of that when you made this decision?
Senator, I do not recall being aware of that.
Senator's time expired. Chair would note at this time, since there's been a reference to declassification, I just want to draw a distinction that the Durham investigation done by the Department of Justice is not in the purview of the Central Intelligence Agency. Any decision to declassify or keep classified is a Department of Justice decision, and I just wanted to separate that from the discussions about Ms. Haspel's background at the agency. With that, the chair recognizes Senator Lankford.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Ms. Haspel, thank you not only for your over 3 decades of work for our nation, the lack of recognition that you've had for 3 decades from our nation because you've served in a way that no one has seen. So this is an opportunity we get to be able to say thank you to you for a lot of years of a lot of service, being able to protect our nation. It's also pretty remarkable in some of the dialogue today as I go through the very long list of people that have recommended you and that are both Republican and Democrat, and to be able to see the reports that have been written by the inspectors general about you, about previous DOJ about you, that have cleared you of any concerns and that have reaffirmed you. And whether it is President Obama's Director of the CIA, John Brennan, or whether it's Jim Clapper, Director of National Intelligence for President Obama, Henry Kissinger, John McLaughlin, Mike Morrell, Mike Mukasey, John Negroponte, Leon Panetta, George Tenet, the list goes on of people that have looked at your record and that have examined it and said you'd be a qualified leader for that. That speaks well of your history and of your leadership, and we appreciate that very, very much. Let me ask you a little bit about some ongoing threats that are coming at us we haven't had much time to talk about today. Let's talk about the very serious counter-narcotics threat that's coming at us in some of the changing situations that's happening in our hemisphere, dealing with drug trafficking organizations and international drug trafficking in particular. What do you sense is a role that the CIA should have in the ongoing work to be able to do counter-narcotics work in our hemisphere?
Senator, thank you very much for that question. And you've been a big supporter of CIA's counter-narcotics work. But when I returned from my overseas posting in early 2017, I was frankly shocked at what I saw was happening in our country, particularly in places like my home state of Kentucky, where there's a real crisis. But I think the number is 63,000 Americans we lost last year. We're losing 115 Americans a day. That seems to me to be an extraordinary crisis for our country. I would like to talk about this, if we could, some this afternoon. But as you know, CIA does have a fairly modest program to try and stop the flow of drugs from coming across our southern border: heroin, cocaine, and fentanyl. We work very closely in Central America and Latin America to try and stop that flow. I've been talking to our team at CIA headquarters about this for several months. I've asked them to come up with some options to grow that program. We have extraordinary support for that program on this committee. But I think in light of the fact that we're losing 115 Americans a day, that we're losing almost a generation in some places, that we have to do more. CIA is not the primary agency, but we can do a lot, but it has to be a whole of government effort.
All right, so flip on that into the cyber activities and some of the cyber threats we have. Some of those cyber threats are changing internationally. There were criminal gangs in other countries that were trying to steal credit cards, steal information, and to be able to sell that out there. Now there are some governments that are using the criminal gangs in their own country, and they become this strange hybrid that's out there between a criminal gang sometimes and a government entity at other times. And we're very dependent on trying to be able to identify where these threats are coming from and who those threats are coming from. What is needed with CIA, and what do you anticipate would be the need to be able to help our nation be able to determine who the threats are and where they're coming from?
Senator, you're quite right that it's a growing threat, and it's another area where you have to have a whole of government effort. And it's a very murky world, as you point out. But China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea have very aggressive offensive cyber programs, both to steal secrets, but also in some cases to earn illicit money. CIA can probably make the biggest contribution in collection about these other countries' activities and various groups' activities so that we can inform the U.S. government agencies that have to mount our defense. And everyone in the U.S. government has been struggling, as all Western governments are, on what is the most effective way to organize yourself for cyber defense. We're still working on that, but CIA has a big role. It's another area that I'd like to amplify on a bit this afternoon if I have the opportunity.
I will look forward to that. I yield back.
Senator Manchin.
Ms. Haspel, I want to thank you, first of all, for your service to our country, and also I thank you for your efforts on drugs. We're our ground zero in West Virginia, and we need everybody in this fight because it is a war, and we must win it. Let me ask the first, what was your thoughts and greatest concerns for the United States of America after the 9/11 attack?
I think for probably every American, it was also surreal. But what I was very worried about, and we weren't wrong about this, is that other attacks were being planned. So I think everyone in the U.S. government, probably across the board, but certainly in the intelligence community and FBI, we all felt that we had let the American people down somehow. We didn't know these attacks were coming, and it was very important to identify who was behind these attacks and stop future attacks.
I think back on that day, and I remember it very vividly, as if it was just happening this morning, but I remember that the only thing I cared about, first of all, my first thought was anybody in my family harmed that day. Next of all, anyone that I might have known or related to or thought about or had acquaintances with. Next of all, my final thought was any other Americans harmed? That's all I cared about. What was this doing and what mammoth? I thought about history, Pearl Harbor. How did we react as a nation after Pearl Harbor? I remember the cruel and unusual internment of Japanese Americans. And we've never gone down that road again. And our thought process would have been there. But let me go another step further. After 9/11, had any laws or rules for CIA procedure changed because of the attacks, of those attacks? And do we change any procedures after that? You're saying you would never do it now. You said you would say no to the president because that's not where we're going. That's not where you want the CIA to be. Were those changed after that?
Senator, I'm not sure I understand exactly, but CIA does not do interrogations. We historically have not done interrogations, and we don't do interrogations today.
Let me go this direction. Are there any other tapes that would reveal agents' identities that have been destroyed, and is that the standard procedure? Or are there any tapes of interrogation that haven't been destroyed, of your knowledge?
Senator, probably I don't know. I don't know if there are any other tapes. I don't believe there are any other tapes associated with the particular interrogation activity that was on the 92 tapes, but I simply don't know if there are any other videotapes of any other activity.
And then we'll go into this. Explain why you feel so strongly today the CIA should not be an interrogation business. And would it have anything to do with basically the makeup of the CIA with the appointment to your appointment now for that versus the code of conduct for the military? Is there a difference of why you think that the CIA should not be in that business and why it should be done in the military?
That's a great question. CIA historically has not done interrogations. We don't have interrogators, so we just
No, I'm
don't have
saying
any
that most of the
expertise.
questions have been directed to you has been because of that.
Yes, that's right. And why DOD, of course, does do battlefield interrogations, and that is why we have the Army Field Manual. We have very clear legal and policy guidance for those DOD interrogations, which I support. And then, of course, the FBI has its own authorities for interviewing terrorist suspects. And then, as we mentioned, we have the high-value interrogation group, and CIA is part of that. We support that with substantive expertise about a particular group or an individual, but we don't conduct interrogations.
And I know you stated strongly, that's why you would feel very compelled to tell the president, no, this is not something we do and it's not our line of work.
I just think there are other U.S. government entities that are suited to holding detainees, and that isn't CIA.
Let me say this about the CIA and being on this committee for 1 year and on armed services for 6 years prior to that. When I speak to the West Virginia citizens today, I brag about what you all do in the clandestine services and the people they provide to serve for our country to keep us safe. I have never, ever seen the quality of people at that level to make the sacrifices they make and to make sure that they understand the importance and how successful and how good they are, is that for a country that has a target on its back the way the United States has had since 9/11, and probably will for a long time, to be as safe as we have in the most troubled world, in the most dangerous world, with a terrorist mentality. I want to thank you on behalf of every West Virginian in this country for the job you all do.
Thank you, Senator.
Thanks, Senator. Senator Cotton.
Thank you, Mrs. Haspel, for your many decades of service to our country and for taking on this new role despite the accusations, entirely false, you know that you would face from some of my colleagues in the Senate and from the media, some of these protesters we've seen here today. I'm very grateful to you, as I know that all the men and women of the CIA are grateful. I have to clear up some of the things that have been said here before. Senator Warner said that he worried about the message we would be sending if we confirmed you to the director of CIA. Well, let's look at that from the other direction. What message would we be sending if we didn't confirm you to the CIA, to the men and women of the CIA, to the GS-15s who may be asked to take on a controversial position that a future administration with new lawyers might not like? And for that matter, what message does overwhelming Democratic opposition to your nomination send? In fact, if you had been nominated by President Obama, or if Hillary Clinton had won and nominated you to be the CIA director, how many votes do you think you would have gotten to be confirmed as CIA director? You don't have to answer. I also have to take exception to what Senator Warner said when he called an opinion of the Office of Legal Counsel that was signed off by the Attorney General of the United States as a get-out-of-jail-free card. Do you believe, acting under the legal approval of the Attorney General, that you or any other CIA officer should have gone to jail and you needed a get-out-of-jail-free card? You can answer that one, please.
Senator, CIA follows the law.
That's exactly what I thought. Let's turn to the circumstances of what the Counterterrorism Center was doing the days you were there. I think Senator Collins asked an excellent sequence of questions that got at many of these points. I just want to tie a bow on some of them. These programs were, to the best of your understanding, approved by the Commander-in-Chief, legally approved by the Attorney General, and supported by the Director of the CIA, who I point out at the time was the former Democratic staff director of this committee. Is that correct?
That's correct, Senator.
You said that you were not a senior manager when those programs were created. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Was John Brennan a member of the Senior Intelligence Service and the Deputy Executive Director at the time a senior manager, in your opinion?
Senator, I believe Mr. Brennan was the deputy exter of the agency at that time.
And you'd consider that a senior manager position at the CIA?
I believe it's the number 4 position.
For John Brennan, who was confirmed to be the CIA director by the following members of this committee: Senator Warner, Senator Feinstein, Senator Heinrich, Senator Collins, Senator King, Senator Burr, Senator Manchin, Senator Wyden, and Senator Rubio. Let's turn to the question about the tapes that were destroyed in 2005. Did any lawyer at any time in any organization of the federal government say that there was a legal prohibition to destroy those tapes?
Senator, they did not. They were very consistent that there was no legal requirement to preserve the tapes because of the written record.
And it's your testimony that there is a written record that fully documents whatever may or may not have happened.
Senator, yes, and there were 2 reviews done of the written record by the Office of General Counsel and the Office of the Inspector General.
In other words, the CIA has a record no different from the federal court system, which keeps transcripts and allows sketch drawings, but does not allow video recordings in a federal courtroom. Is that correct?
That's correct, Senator.
You were the chief of staff to Mr. Rodriguez when this happened, correct?
Yes,
And at his direction, you drafted a cable that he later sent.
that's correct.
Michael Morrell, who supported Hillary Clinton in the last election, cleared you of any wrongdoing in drafting that cable,
He did.
as did an investigation by the Office of Special Counsel and the Office of the Inspector General.
That investigation was closed without charges for Mr. Rodriguez or anyone.
Would holding you responsible for drafting a cable at your boss's direction make any more sense than holding a Senate speechwriter responsible for the boring speeches senators give on the Senate floor?
Senator, I'll defer to you.
I would submit that it does not. Finally, there's a lot of talk about policy guidance and that there was some awareness by Mr. Rodriguez that higher officials in the government who were political appointees had qualms or expressed reservations. I would say that's another way for which politicians don't want to take responsibilities when they are placed in certain positions, whether they are elected or appointed, and give the answers that they are responsible for giving, yes or no, and take the chips to fall where they may.
Senator's time's expired. Senator Harris.
Thank you. So let's just be clear. This hearing is not about the incredible importance of the service and sacrifice of the men and women of the CIA. That's not what this hearing is about. This hearing is not about the importance of the agency's mission, both of which I wholeheartedly support. This hearing is about your suitability to be the director of the CIA, and in our responsibility to participate in choosing who will be the next director of the CIA, the mission that we have now includes understanding that who we choose will be a signal to the men and women of the agency, to the American people, and to our neighbors around the world about our values as Americans on critical issues that range from our adherence to a rule of law to what we prioritize in terms of professional accountability and what we prioritize in terms of our moral authority as Americans and as a country. So one question I've not heard you answer is, do you believe that the previous interrogation techniques were immoral?
Senator, I believe that CIA officers to whom you referred.
It's a yes or no answer. Do you believe the previous interrogation techniques were immoral? I'm not asking do you believe they were legal. I'm asking do you believe they were immoral?
Senator, I believe that CIA did extraordinary work to prevent another attack on this country given the legal tools that we were authorized to use.
Please answer yes or no. Do you believe in hindsight that those techniques were immoral?
Senator, what I believe sitting here today is that I support the higher moral standard we have decided to hold ourselves to.
Can you please answer the question? Now armed with hindsight, do you believe they were immoral? Yes or no?
Senator, I believe that we should hold ourselves to the moral standard outlined in the Army Field Manual.
Okay, so I understand that you've not answered the question, but I'm going to move on. So I understand that you, from previous answers, are serving as the authority over whether or not CIA information concerning you will be classified or not. Given an obvious appearance of conflict, will you agree to recuse yourself from the responsibility and the authority to make decisions about whether or not that information will be classified or not. Will you agree to recuse yourself of that responsibility and authority? Yes or no?
Senator, I am following the guidelines that exist at CIA, and there is another declassification authority. It's called the IRO. I have not interfered with
Do you believe that you have the authority to recuse yourself?
I'll take that for the record. I may have the authority to recuse myself. I'm not a
Assuming you
lawyer. I'm not sure about that.
Assuming you do, and I believe you do, will you agree to recuse yourself from the responsibility and the authority of making decisions about what CIA information about you and your record will be classified or declassified?
Senator, if I had agreed with the proposals that have come up people thought it would be advantageous to me, I think I would have been abdicating my responsibility to follow the rules that everyone at CIA follows.
Okay, and you also in this hearing have a responsibility to answer the questions that are being asked of you. I'm going to ask you a different question. Would you agree that given this appearance of conflict or potential conflict around the classification or declassification of these documents, would you agree that Director Coates instead should have the responsibility for declassification decisions regarding your background?
Senator, I think one important thing is that this committee plays a unique role to review the classified record, and we have sent over every piece of paper we can lay our hands on about my classified record, all of my evaluations over a 33-year career. And I hope every senator has had the opportunity to look at that classified material.
Indeed, I have.
But
And
there
I
are
have another question for you then, because I only have a few minutes left. I don't have a few seconds left. The president has asserted that torture works. Do you agree with that statement?
Senator, I don't believe that torture works. I believe that in the CIA's program, and I'm not attributing this to enhanced interrogation techniques, I believe, as many people, directors who have sat in this chair before me, that valuable information was obtained from senior al-Qaeda operatives that allowed us to defend this country and prevent another attack.
Is that a yes?
No, it's not a yes. We got valuable information from debriefing of al-Qaeda detainees, and I don't think it's knowable whether interrogation techniques played a role in that.
Thank you. My time is up.
Senator Cornyn.
Ms. Haspel, I note that one prominent national security expert has said that if President Obama had nominated you to be director of the CIA, it would be an easy decision to support your nomination. So it strikes me that you're being treated much differently than Director Brennan was, which Senator Cotton noted he was voted out of this committee by a vote of 12-3 and confirmed by a vote of 63-44 to be CIA director. So it strikes me, and this is not a question for you, this is an observation by me, that you and this president are being held to a double standard, and I think that's regrettable. I also remember that President Obama in 2009, when he declassified the Office of Legal Counsel memos that have been referred to here, promised the men and women of the CIA that, quote, "We will protect all who acted reasonably and relied upon legal advice from the Department of Justice, that their actions were lawful. They need to be fully confident that as they defend the nation, I will defend them." And I think this committee and this Senate should remember those words by President Obama and apply those when considering your confirmation. Senator Feinstein was kind enough about a year ago to send me a book by Peter Bergen called Manhunt. It's a 10-year history of the search for Osama bin Laden, where, as I was thumbing through it recently, I was reminded that post 9/11, President Bush was concerned about reports that he had received that Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda was meeting with Pakistani officials connected with their nuclear program to gain access to a nuclear device that they might then use for a follow-on attack against cities like Washington, D.C. Without divulging classified information, can you confirm that there were concerns about follow-on attacks using nuclear devices, biological weapons, other weapons of mass destruction that might have killed more innocent Americans as happened on 9/11? Was that the environment in which you and the country were operating in at the time?
Senator, there were very grave concerns on that front, and indeed Al-Qaeda had those kinds of programs. Efforts to acquire crude, dirty bombs, efforts to develop, they had a program, a biological weapons program. I remember the operative who was in charge of that. There was very deep concern about potential contacts, and we continue to monitor this very closely today between extremist and Pakistani nuclear scientists.
So here we sit years following the terrible events of 9/11, feeling very safe and secure, thanks to the incredible work being done by the intelligence community, including the good men and women at the CIA, as well as the men and women who serve in the United States military. We're feeling very safe and secure, and the memories of that terrible event are very distant. But it strikes me that in addition to the double standard that I believe you and this president are being held to, compared to Secretary Brennan, Director Brennan and President Obama's administration, that people have simply forgotten. And that's dangerous, to have forgotten the circumstances under which they were operating at the time and doing their dead level best to protect the country from a follow-on attack. I just want to note in closing that recently I had a chance to travel to a garden spot with the chairman and visit with some of those unnamed patriots who
Thank you
served
for doing that.
in the CIA. And I was struck by talking to one gentleman. He was talking about his girlfriend that he no longer had. And I said,
It's a common story.
I said, this must be incredibly difficult on marriages and on relationships and on families. Would you just take just a second to comment about the sacrifices that intelligence officers, rank and file employees of the CIA make when it comes to those sorts of relationships? And
Senator, thank you. You know, maybe I could start by saying I talked about how CIA's boots were the first on the ground in Afghanistan. We suffered the first U.S. casualty, but maybe it's important for the American people to know that CIA officers are still out there in Afghanistan. Our officers are out there fighting extremist Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. We have 125 stars on our memorial wall now. Many of those, it's shocking how many stars we've added. I believe we added 7 stars to our wall last year. Perhaps I could cite one personal example of an officer who worked for me. She was the most extraordinary woman. She was our #1 Al-Qaeda expert. I worked with her in the Counterterrorism Center. She was having her 3rd baby in those days following 9/11, but we needed her because she had such deep expertise. She later worked for me on terrorism issues in a foreign capital, and then she went to Afghanistan, and she and 6 colleagues were murdered by a suicide bomber who penetrated our base. These are very real sacrifices. These are my friends and colleagues. All of us at CIA have a commitment and an honor-bound obligation to uphold the memory of those officers, mothers who've left their children to go to the field and sometimes have given them their all in service of this country.
I thank Senator Cornyn and Senator Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Haspel. You've been working with the administration now for 15 months. You've had the opportunity to brief the president. Have you ever been alone with the president?
Senator, I'm usually there with Senator Coates, a brilliant analyst who delivers the actual analytic briefing, and usually the National Security Advisor, the Vice President.
There have been allegations, Mr. Comey, one, that while he was alone, the President asked for a personal pledge of loyalty. If you were ever approached by the President and asked for a personal pledge of loyalty, what would you respond?
Senator, my only loyalty is to the American people and the Constitution of the United States. I am honored bound and will work very hard to deliver to this President and his administration the best performance and intelligence CIA can deliver.
And if you were approached in such a way and such a demand was made of you, would you inform this committee and the Congress that you had been so approached?
Senator, I've worked very closely with this President. I don't believe that such a circumstance would ever occur. CIA has been treated with enormous respect, and our expertise is valued for what we bring to the table.
If it occurred, would you inform the committee?
Senator, it's a hypothetical. I don't think it's going to occur. I'm very confident about that.
Does not seem to be a hypothetical. People have alleged that that has happened already.
Senator, I don't know anything about that conversation.
Okay. Now, Senator Harris was asking you about the morality of the enhanced interrogation techniques, the waterboarding. At the time that you were involved in it, in fact, fairly directly, you expressed no moral concerns. In fact, you have suggested that it was good tradecraft and that it contributed to information that was developed. If one of your operations officers was captured and subject to waterboarding today or tomorrow or the next day,
Senator will suspend. Capitol Police will remove. If there are any other further disruptions, I will ask the Capitol Police to remove all individuals. Senator can continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If one of your operators were captured, subjected to waterboarding and enhanced interrogation techniques, which you, I believe, supervise, would you consider that to be moral, since perhaps the other entity did not have legal restrictions, and good tradecraft, as you appeared to do when you were involved in it previously?
Senator, I don't believe the terrorists follow any guidelines or civilized norms or the law. CIA follows the law.
Excuse me, madam. You seem to be saying that you were not following civilized norms and the law or anything else when you were conducting those self-same activities, if that's the analogy you're going to draw.
Senator, I'm sorry, can you I can't.
Very simple. You have an operations officer who is captured. He's being waterboarded. I've asked you very simply, would you determine that to be immoral and something that should never be done, condoned in any way, shape, or form? Your response seems to be that civilized nations don't do it, but uncivilized nations do it, or uncivilized groups do it.
The United States does it to its own
Civilized
soldiers.
nation, a civilized nation was doing it until it was outlawed by this Congress.
Senator, I would never obviously support inhumane treatment of any CIA officers. We've lost CIA officers over the years to terrorists. I just gave an example. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed personally killed a Wall Street Journal correspondent and filmed that. I don't think there's any comparison between CIA officers serving their country, adhering to U.S. law, and terrorists who by their very definition are not following anybody's law.
Finally, in the Morrell report, which you've somewhat acknowledged, there was opposition to the destruction of the tapes by 2 White House counsels the Council of the Vice President, the DNI, the DCIA, and a member of the Congress, and yet those tapes were destroyed. Do you consider that to be insubordinate actions without the director, in this case, Mr. Goss, being notified?
Senator, I think that consultation with the director was essential, and a lesson coming out of that is the importance of making sure all the stakeholders have agreed to include congressional oversight. There's also a leadership lesson. Don't let real security issues go unaddressed.
So the action was insubordinate, and you would not countenance anyone in your organization doing something like that?
I expect my officers to bring those difficult issues to me, and I think I have a reputation for not just leaving them in the inbox. I will say this, Mr. Rodriguez has taken full accountability for his decision, which he thought he was operating under his own authority.
Thank you.
Senator's time's expired. We've come to the conclusion of the open session, and I would duly note for members, it's my understanding that we're going to have 2 recorded votes starting at 12 o'clock. My intention's to start the closed hearing immediately after the second vote, and the Vice Chairman and I would like to make some closing statements. I do want to take the opportunity, Ms. Haspel, since 2 individuals have been mentioned, and they will be the subject of conversation in the closed session. But for the American people's purpose, would you share for them who Khalid Sheikh Mohammed is and Nasiri?
Chairman, thank you. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was the architect and mastermind of the 9/11 attacks. His nephew, Ramzi Youssef, was behind the 93 attack on the World Trade Center, and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed financed that operation. He also was behind the infamous Bojinka plot in the Philippines. Tragically, he was the individual who personally killed a Wall Street Journal American correspondent and filmed that heinous act. He also, after 9/11, carried out an attack on a synagogue in Tunisia, and he had other attacks planned. We were able to warn allies about a planned attack, for example, on Heathrow Airport. Mr. Nashiri was the emir of the attack in 2000 on the USS Cole, in which we lost 17 sailors. He also was behind the attack on a French ship, the Limburg, and he was the Al-Qaeda chief of operations in the Gulf and the Arabian Peninsula.
I thank you for that. I think it's important to put into context when individuals are mentioned, what their role was in terrorism and why they were the focus of not only the agency, but law enforcement. With that, I'd like to recognize the Vice Chairman for any closing statements he'd like to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to submit for the record, to refresh my colleagues' memories, the testimony of then nominee John Brennan, who quite explicitly repudiated the EIT techniques and programs, who stated that he expressed his personal objections and some of his views to agency colleagues, which I think is a relevant piece of information when we considered Mr. Brennan's testimony for those of us who decided to vote in favor of him.
And that would be the same Senator,
excuse me,
that would be the
sir.
same
Excuse me,
Mr.
sir.
Brennan who supports her nomination.
Senator will suspend.
We need the full record on the record.
No, Senator will suspend.
John Brennan supports her nomination.
Appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. Let me also say this. I know this is something that is a different experience for you. You have led your life serving our country in the shadows. But should you be confirmed in this position, you're going to have a whole different set of responsibilities that, candidly, I understand that perhaps nothing in your career has fully prepared you for. You have to not only earn our trust, where we have more exposure to your records and classified information. You have to earn the trust of other members who are not on this panel and folks in the House who won't even consider this. You also I think, have to earn the trust of the American public. So 3 brief points I want to make. I appreciate the fact and the support you have from the agency's workforce, and the fact that your confirmation will be the first time in 54 years an operations officer would be confirmed to be director. And I also understand what are normal procedures on declassification. But I think it troubles some of my colleagues when we do get stories that float from the press that point out some remarkable parts of your career, your interactions with Mother Teresa, the fact that you were shot at by foreign operatives. And there does appear to be information put forward by the agency that helps you. And I think many of us, and I've reviewed most of your record, I think there's many extraordinary things in your record, but the willingness to lean forward on that declassification, not for our benefit on this committee, we get that, but for other members and for the public, I'd hope you reconsider some of your decisions made there. I also appreciate very much, and at least my line of questioning, on the fact that you believe at this point that the RDI program is not consistent with American values. I wish you would have said that more clearly and more directly. I've heard is all, and finally, the question that if you are asked by this president to take an action that you believed was immoral, regardless of the status of a legal opinion, we finally got to the point that you said you would not follow that. You gave me an even stronger answer in private. I just feel that as you try to gain our trust and other senators, and for that matter, the public's trust, you realize this is a totally different kind of role than you've had any time in your career. And having clarity on these issues and having clarity on what your appointment will represent and what values you will bring to this critically important job at this moment in time is extraordinarily important. My hope and prayer will be that as we consider this nomination, the more you can bring us that clarity for those of us who want to give you that fair consideration that you deserve, and candidly, the extraordinary service you provided our nation is so important, so we can make the right judgment, so that we can know the character of the individual who will take on, again, one of the most important jobs in our country's protection, and particularly at this moment in time. So I thank you for your testimony. I would like to see more. I regret some of my colleagues' comments in terms of mischaracterization, but that's part of the process, and welcome to it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the Vice Chairman. I would ask unanimous consent to enter into the record 2 documents provided by Senator Feinstein in opposition to the nomination. One from myself, a statement of support from Attorney General Michael Mukasey. I would expand my unanimous consent to include any documents that are for or against the nomination. And I would ask unanimous consent that every member be given the opportunity for additional follow-on questions. And those QFRs would need to be in by the close of business tomorrow.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Very, very quickly, following up on that point you made, and I support that. I did have several additional questions for the public record, and if I could at least make clear, I think it's important to have those before we vote in the committee, those answers to the additional questions, and I just wanted to convey that, and I hope we can get consent for that too.
Duly noted.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask you a question, please?
Senator
Briefly.
Cornyn.
I think there's been some comment made about committee members not getting responsive information, but I know declassified materials have been provided in a public setting. It is true, isn't it, that classified materials will be made available to members in a classified setting?
Everything that I think has been requested is available to members, not to all staff. And any inquiry into those documents will be made available in the closed setting. And I stand to be here as long as we need be tonight for every senator to ask the full breadth of questions that they have. With that, Jen, I'd like to thank you for your testimony today.
Thank you.
And I look forward to continuing the conversation in the closed setting. Before we adjourn the open session, though, I want to add a few closing remarks. As you know, I'm a strong supporter of your nomination to be director of the Central Intelligence Agency. I can think of few, if any, individuals as qualified to lead the agency as you are, particularly at this challenging time. You may, in fact, be the most qualified nominee ever nominated for this role. You've been a leader in the field and at headquarters. You have the respect of the workforce, of your peers, of Republicans, of Democrats, of military officers, and of civilian security leaders. You have the courage to speak truth to power, and you've demonstrated that courage time and time again. You're intimately familiar with the threats facing our nation. Where others can discuss world events, you've lived them. For you, there's no learning curve. You have a vision for the agency and its future. It's obviously informed by your career, your past experiences, but you bring a clear-eyed understanding of the agency's mission going forward, and I think you have re-emphasized that today. I support your nomination for all of these reasons, but I'm also mindful of the historic nature of your nomination and what it means for those first tour case officers and junior analysts that will join the agency this year and in years to come. I know you don't like to talk about it, so I will. Outside the agency workforce, not many Americans get an opportunity to walk the halls of the old headquarters building. Those who do, though, including the members and staff of this committee, frequently enter the OHB, climb the stairs, and turn down that hallway. As they do, they enter a series of portraits depicting former directors of OSS, Central Intelligence, and the Central Intelligence Agency. We see them every day, as does the workforce. Some of those directors were loved, some were controversial, and some little understood the agency they were asked to lead. Some made disastrous decisions out of hubris or inexperience or both. But one thing is common. All of the portraits are men. Many want to make your nomination about one small piece of agency's past. Most of us, though, are looking towards the agency's future. I think it's important to remember Director Brennan's, to put in context Director Brennan's not only time there and his testimony, but the fact is that you're being criticized for not speaking up when you were there, and nor did he. And I want to make sure that we don't hold you to a different standard for any reason. Averill Haynes and Moreau Park and others who have served, are currently serving, have cracked the glass ceiling at the agency. You're poised to break it. It may be impossible to measure the importance of that breakthrough, but I know that your confirmation will send a signal to the current workforce and the workforce of the future that a lifetime of commitment to the agency and its mission can still and will be rewarded. I want to thank you for your willingness to go through this treacherous process. I'm not sure if I was in your position that I would expose myself to it, but I thank you for your willingness to lead. I thank you for your willingness to serve. This hearing is now adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.